This is the Full Ton Podcast. And welcome back to the Full Ton Podcast. I am your permanent guest host, John Fulton, and joining me today is no one. As you may have noticed, if you're one of the 20 people who actually have seen this program, there was no episode last week. There was a number of reasons for that. Number one on that list is that Matt and I now live on opposite sides of town, and so it's harder for us to schedule times to get together. And I don't like doing this by myself. But here we are. So let's get into it. Today's topic, or at least our starting topic, is what kind of violence is appropriate for different age groups. A lot of people, I think, don't realize, there's compilations online of all the different, hey, this was rated PG back in the day, and it's like, Poltergeist, and somebody's, in a dream sequence ripping their face off. Indiana Jones, the first, Raiders of the Lost Ark, that was rated PG originally. Melting faces and all, exploding, and people getting buzzed into bloody pulp by propellers, all of that, all PG. And I think the theory behind it was that, you decided what your kids were going to watch. It was pretty much as simple as that. If a parent went to the movie beforehand and decided, yeah, that's all right, or that's not good enough for me, then they didn't go. And that makes a certain amount of sense, but people started to read it as that's good for this age, I think. And so they would just start sending people to it. And so there was a huge amount of stuff that ended up being in the PG range because it was the safest rating to give. People couldn't complain because it's, hey, you warned them. But at the same time, there was lots of cushy stuff that ended up going in there. So when you did go there, there was a chance that everything was going to be, fine, kind of like The Incredibles. And then there was also a chance that you were going to end up walking into, Poltergeist. I think that was part of the reason, you had that big deal about Spielberg, and he's like, you should add, the PG-13 rating, and the MPAA eventually adopted that, and now we've had kind of a different set of norms where everything's kind of switching between those two. Everything is either PG or PG-13. PG is basically safe, and PG-13 is basically edgy. It's like people will actually fight to get out of the G rating. If it's not PG, it's not cool. If it's not PG-13, it's not edgy. And then you have R, which is like ultimate coolness. But it also ends up cutting out a bunch of those younger folks, so, people start complaining. So, you don't want to be an R either unless, you're Deadpool and you just don't give a crap. But the reason I wanted to talk about this, because this isn't just a function of time. It's not that our culture has just become edgier as time has gone on. And as an example of that, I wanted to talk about the Chronicles of Narnia. Now, most of us remember, the C.S. Lewis books. You had The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then the other 7. And just The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe it's a pretty safe book in terms of, you're not going to have them dealing with sex or drugs or gang violence or any of that old stuff. But at the same time, it's mostly it's a fairy tale. It's a kid's fairy tale. But at the same time, you read this story and you realize one of the reasons it's such a classic is because it's not just a kid's story. It really, really does work on a deeper level. And this was something that Lewis felt very strongly about, was that he said if you read a story when you're young and you can't read it again when you're old and get more out of it, then it's not really that good a story to begin with. I don't remember exactly. I'm paraphrasing. I can't remember exactly how he said it. But if I can find a link, maybe I'll put it in the show notes. But it's really a good quote. And Lewis was full of those. He's an amazing guy. Anyway, there's a scene in that book, and there's a scene in the film, which are both played very differently. They made a film of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in 2005. It was riding the wave after Lord of the Rings, and everybody was off making fantasy movies. And of course, the second thing everybody thinks of after Tolkien is, when are they going to make Narnia? At least where I came from in the Midwest. And so finally they made it, and it starred these 4 fairly talented folks, and the CGI was pretty good. I thought the plot was, I mean, it really does stick to the book fairly well, and it's really not a bad film. But I remember thinking it was a lot better as a kid than I've thought of it looking back on it now. I haven't liked it quite as much on repeat viewings. And I think part of the reason for that is because what's styled as safe in a film is really quite different than what's styled as safe in a novel. And I'm going to give you a good example of this. Lewis was a military veteran. He was a veteran of World War I. He'd seen combat. When he wrote a fairy tale, he felt that he couldn't leave that out. You were having a fight. There was a fight. There was a battle scene. There's a great final battle at the end of the book and the movie. And there's several fight scenes in between. But the interesting thing about the book is that it feels very, it's very precise about the way it doles out violence. It's very precise about the way it decides what it wants to talk about and what it doesn't want to talk about. And Lewis does this by being the narrator in the book. When you're reading Tolkien, the feeling is that you're getting this all read to you by somebody with a harp or somebody like, in the Conan stories where there's like drums and it's like Mako at the opening. In the time before the great waters drank Atlantis, except for it's like a lot more deeper. It's like in the days before, something, and he's just talking like that. It's very epic and it's very deep and it's all this is. When Lewis is narrating the Chronicles of Narnia, he's narrating it as if he's telling a story to children, but at the same time, it's not necessarily as if he's telling a children's story. He sounds like a parent, telling a story to a bunch of children. And so he'll describe, what each character is feeling kind of from his perspective, but in this kind of semi-humorous way. He's got this kind of cleverness to him. Like he'll talk about how, and he'll say, and then Lucy was feeling very upset because everybody wasn't believing her. But at the same time, she was, and then he would like compare it to something, and he's obviously playing a narrator. It's not third person, totally omniscient, if you know what I mean. The way most modern novels are, the whole realism thing. He's very much telling it as if it's an old tale, and he is telling it to you as your, great uncle or whatever. And as a result, you get the feeling that there's things that he's kind of self-censoring that you wouldn't necessarily see, or like if you actually saw the event in question, things would be maybe a lot more mature, but he's toning it down for you because he is the narrator. He can do that. He can decide what to focus on. In a movie, you can do that, I mean, with camera placement and everything, but when they were making the film, I feel like they were making it as if they were making the universe according to the way that the storyteller censors it, and that's not necessarily always a good thing. And here's my example. In the book, Lewis describes Peter's the oldest sibling of the 4 Pevensey children, and he's talking to Aslan, and Aslan is, everybody knows is Lion Jesus, and Aslan's talking to him and telling him all these different things he's going to have to do as king or his thing, and he's congratulating him. You led your siblings safely along all this different stuff and all that, and he's telling him about stuff, and Peter's like, wow, I don't know, there's some great destiny thing happening here, and I don't think I quite understand it, and I don't think I'm quite ready for it. And Aslan's like, that's okay. And then suddenly they hear, actually Aslan, I think, knows it before Peter hears it, and he's like, your sisters are in trouble. And they hear screaming, and Peter goes, oh no. And so he runs over, and remember, they're in the middle of the Aslan's army's camp right now, so things are supposed to be nominally safe. Everybody's doing pretty well up to this point, and then suddenly, oh no, there's a challenge, there's something happening, there's, a raid or whatever happening. And so Peter suddenly knows that his sisters are in danger, and he runs in the direction of the screaming and finds his sisters climbing up a tree, trying to get away from these 2 wolves. These are talking wolves, so they're sentient like humans. It's a fantasy story and all that. And the Queen's secret police the evil Queen's secret police is all made up of these wolves, these talking wolves. And he confronts the wolf, and one of them checks himself and runs away, but there's two wolves, and the other is the chief of police. He's Mogram. He doesn't back down from anything. So Peter doesn't necessarily know that, though. He just knows it's Wolf. And so he confronts the wolf. The wolf kind of checks itself. You can see that Wolf deciding whether he wants to engage or not engage. And then he makes up his mind and leaps at him, and Peter kind of just... The rest of it is kind of a blur, and it's just like slash, 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 slash. And then suddenly the wolf is dead in his feet, and he's shaking all over, and he's just like, oh my God, what just happened? And Aslan comes up to him and kind of goes, okay, it's over, you did a good job. And kind of gets him to put down his sword and reminds him to wipe it off. It's covered in blood. He says, you have to wipe your sword off, Peter. And so Peter goes, oh yeah. And so he takes care of his weapon, and then he puts it away, and then Aslan knights him. I think with the sword, which is also kind of odd, but, you know. We keep thinking, whenever we think of a lion that's on his 2 feet, we think, like, the Cowardly Lion, so that's also speaking kind of to its age and difference. But I thought the interesting thing was just, you don't show blood in an American Hollywood PG film. You just don't. Or at least not, like the injuries as they happen. You can show like, little scratches on people's heads and stuff, and it's, oh look, there's a little blood there. But you don't show like splatters or like cuts or anything like that. You don't know. That's all strictly, our, Gladiator level stuff. I think they've started to make concessions in that for PG-13 films. Like you'll see the red mist if bullets hit something, and it'll just like. But you don't see blood in PG films. And so for the film, the 2005 film, instead they have this sort of drawn out sequence where Peter runs up to the wolf and points his sword at him like a gun. And then he goes, oh no, Susan! And Susan, his sister, goes, Peter! And then his sisters kind of talk to him for a bunch. And he's sort of looking at them, and he's obviously scared. And then you have Mogram, and Mogram, the wolf, is monologuing like a Bond villain. And he's got this big, deep, gravelly voice, and he's like, "You think you're something, but you're gonna die." And it's just the worst, cheesiest, silliest stuff ever. I didn't really like it, and it goes on, and he's just straining it out, and then Mogram leaps onto Peter and just is basically impaled instantly by the sword, which Mogram's been looking at for the past 5 minutes of monologuing. And I remember seeing that scene going, all right, it was okay. I mean, that's the way movies were shot then, it's just whatever. But I remember thinking at the time, I think I was maybe 12 when it came out. I don't remember exactly. And it was still enjoyable at the time. And they also had a much longer battle at the end. Lewis does not really dwell on the battle that much. He actually does describe it. He does describe, how Aslan helps Peter discuss where all the different people are going to go. And he's like, put your centaurs here and you're here. And then kind of in the past tense discusses how, all the different things that the different characters are doing kind of led together. And so you'll see that Edmund was kind of heavily injured during the battle, and then he goes back in time and kind of explains Lewis as the storyteller goes. And this is because, he decided he was going to confront the witch, and so on the battlefield he confronted the witch and destroyed her wand, and he was the hero who did that, and that's kind of his redemption. But he also got badly injured as a result. And so, in the movie, of course, all that's told in real time and up close and personal. So they have all this stylish, battle scene and stuff. It's not told by the narrator, and it's in the past tense. And so it's a lot more intense, but at the same time, it's still, in a way, a lot less bloody. It doesn't feel the same. And now, I'm not necessarily saying that what we need is to remake Narnia as this carnage fest. But what I am saying is that I think the reason Lewis decided to dwell on violence the way he did was for a very specific reason. And it wasn't about the joy of, it wasn't like a Quentin Tarantino movie where, you have an exaggerated level of sort of hyper-violence where, you shoot somebody and then, whatever character, their head explodes and there's just gore everywhere and, they cut limbs off and stuff. And everybody's turned into bloody chunks and everything. That's kind of... Lewis is thinking very deeply, as a guy who had been to combat, I think, about how you talk about violence to children and you tell them, look, this is a bad, ugly thing that happens, but sometimes it's necessary for peace. And how do you, if you want to not be killed, sometimes you have to kill. And that involves blood, and it's ugly, and it's scary, and it's deadly, and there's still honor in it if you are a knight, if you are a person who restrains themselves, commits themselves to the execution of justice and mercy when it's possible to do so without allowing even more people to be hurt. And I remember as a kid, there was a certain amount of shock value involved in hearing Aslan say, Peter, you've got to wipe the blood off your sword. But at the same time, it felt natural. It felt like that was where it belonged. There was he was trying to say, you've done something that was necessary. You can take pride in stopping evil, but you can't take pride in giving pain to someone else. And you shouldn't. That's what separates you from the enemy. Where the enemy is merely cruel and lets their desire for power overcome their respect for other people and their rights, you get your satisfaction out of the defense of those rights, despite the cost. And in a way, because of that cost. The violence Peter does is not done, to someone helpless. He's doing it to someone who is threatening him. In fact, for most of that scene, Peter is thinking about how scary it would be for the wolf to kill him and for him to feel pain. He doesn't, the wolf, as far as we know, didn't really feel much pain. It was just slash, and it's dead. And what's more, the wolf could have lived at any time if he just had not attacked. If it had turned around and left, and one of the wolves does. Anyway, so I was thinking about that, and I was thinking if there was ever a point in a kid's film where you would let the blood stay, I think that would be a good place to do it. You wouldn't need to put necessarily blood in the rest of the film if you didn't want to. I mean, that might make things a bit too much, but at the same time, Lewis himself cuts it out, really. You don't really see the rest of the battle up close. You don't see him talk about blood again. It's not really super important to the rest of the story that you see that. But for that one moment, I think it was important. And it makes me wonder if, even in a PG movie, that if you'd have left it in just a little bit and stuck to the book just a little bit more, that it might have made it just a little bit more timeless. Instead of just a cheap thrill, that maybe we'd have gotten something worth thinking about, worth dwelling on. Anyway, that's what I thought. Let me know what you think in the comments. This has been the Full Ton Podcast. Please ring the bell and subscribe. If you'd like to support us, you can buy my book at the link in the description below. If you like the show, leave us a comment. If you didn't, comment as well. And until next time, I've been John Fulton. And I'm so lonely.